More than 2.2 billion people live within just 100 kilometers of our planet's coastal zones. That is 30% of the world's total population. Living coral, made up of just a thin layer of billions of fragile organisms, collectively establish the reef systems that protect these vast stretches of coastline. In places like Coral Harbour, on the southwest coast of New Providence in the Bahamas, this interdependent relationship between life in the sea and life on land is a constant reality. For one thing, the channel at Coral Harbour is only accessible during the peak of high tide. This affects the many larger fishing, recreational, and defense force vessels that use it daily to access the open ocean. To increase its operating range and to reduce its response time to security and environmental emergencies, the Ministry of National Security has acquired 9 new vessels for its defense force fleet. Built by Damen Shipyards in Holland, this new state-of-the-art fleet requires a deeper port and channel at Coral Harbour, and Van Oord dredging and marine contractors have been engaged by the Ministry of National Security to dredge the port and the 2-mile-long stretch of ocean floor. The construction project began with a benthic assessment to identify the location and state of health of all hard corals within and just outside the construction impact zone. Conducted by the Bahamas Environment, Science and Technology Commission, this assessment identified 5 distinct coral reefs that were in danger. In an effort to minimize the loss of live coral, the decision was taken to transplant 1,400 individual coral colonies from the 5 threatened reefs to a series of recipient reefs located at a safe distance, 300 to 700 meters up current of the impact zone. These 8 recipient reefs were chosen based on their similarity to the donor reef's water depth, coral species, and reef density. And although they were large, barren areas due to hurricane damage, the recipient reefs were clearly in recovery, and these barren sections were perfect sites for coral colonies to be reattached. Carib Marine, a company that specializes in coral transplantation, was subcontracted to do the work. After their initial scoping exercise where the corals were identified and the recipient sites georeferenced, the Carib Marine research divers began to carefully remove the corals from the reef with hammers and chisels. This is a meticulous process, and divers always sever from the dead base of the colony to avoid coming into contact with the fragile live surfaces. Once successfully removed, the dive team gently pack up to 150 coral heads at a time in specially designed underwater cages. The cages are then lifted with airbags, and the corals, while submerged, are towed to their new home. Once at the recipient site, the cages are unpacked and divers carefully select the final location for each colony. Using a special mixture of either underwater cement or epoxy, clusters of corals were systematically reattached in the same orientation as they were at the donor sites. In instances when corals in excess of 200 kilograms were transplanted, Van Oord personnel used their workboat and crane to lift them off of the sea floor and onto deck. Once on deck, the large corals were continuously wet with sea water and swiftly moved to the recipient site where the research divers gently reattach them to the seafloor. In addition to hard corals, the research divers from Carib Marine also transplanted many soft corals and sponges, and quite remarkably, also relocated hundreds of sea cucumbers, starfish, brittle stars, conch, and other shellfish. To ensure that their efforts are successful, the dive team has established several naturally recruited control reef sites, which they will use for 12 months to compare the state of health of the transplanted corals. Any system of transplantation has inherent stress to coral, but by undertaking the coral reef transplantation, a true effort was made to save thousands of the sensitive marine organisms that make up the coral reef ecosystem. The coordinated activity between Van Oord, the Bahamas Environment, Science and Technology Commission, Carib Marine, and the Ministry of National Security ensures that the project at Coral Harbour maintains the highest commitment to international environmental conventions, treaties and protocols which guarantee the well-being of the planet's coral reefs, a guarantee of well-being that the people of this beautiful island archipelago deserve.